The Apostle Paul is defending himself. He's defending himself to a group of people, to a church in Corinth, that he has really given up so much of his life to try to build them and to bring them to a place of faith in the Lord Jesus Christ. Today we're going to be studying 2 Corinthians, the 10th chapter, verse number 12, and the Apostle Paul continues to defend himself. And he's defending himself not to the church as a whole, but he's defending himself to the church, but because there is a group of people in the church that are trying to discredit the Apostle Paul. That's what we talked about yesterday. That's what we talked about last week. And we're going to continue with verse number 12. Again, 2 Corinthians, the 10th chapter, verse number 12. For we are not bold to class or compare ourselves with some of those who commend us. Now, what is Paul saying here? He's saying we're not bold to class. What's Paul talking about? Paul, when he says bold to class, he means that they are not classified as being in the right class of people. Now, let's think about this. Paul's Jewish. Jewish people in the city of Corinth were not looked up to very often. It was the Greeks, it was the Romans that were really put on the pedestal. It was the Greek gods that were muscular and that looked good. And so the Apostle Paul was Jewish. He was probably small in stature. He probably carried all kinds of scars in his body from his persecutions. And so Paul says we are not bold to class. In other words, we are not part of the upper class. Now, I've been in India. I love the Indian people. Don't care much for their food, but I do love the Indian people. But one of the things that I consider to be an atrocity is their caste system. Because there's some people in India that will never be able to attain the place that God has designed them to attain. Well, I saw it in communism. Communism holds certain people down in a lower class while it elevates other people to a higher class. And that's exactly what the Apostle Paul is talking about when he says we are not bold to class. In other words, we are not very classy. In other words, we're not part of the high class, the high echelon of the Corinthian culture. But then he goes on, or compare ourselves with some of those who commend themselves. You know, one of the worst things that you can do as a believer is to compare yourself to someone else. You're not ever going to be someone else. You were never meant to be someone else. God designed you to be yourself. And so Paul's saying, you know what? We're not going to compare ourselves. We're not going to say, look at me, look at them. Oh, I am not as good as they are. But notice what he says. He says, we are not going to compare ourselves with some of those who commend themselves. Who's doing the commending of these people that Paul's not going to compare himself to? They're commending themselves. They're raising up themselves. They're seating themselves on a high pedestal. They're saying, look at me, look at me. You need to be like me. You need to be me. And you know what Paul says? We're not going to do that. We're not going to we're not going to compare ourselves. We're not part of the class system. But then he goes on, he says, but when they measure themselves by themselves and compare themselves with themselves, they are without understanding. What's Paul saying? When you look at yourself and you put yourself up, and you compare everybody that's around you to yourself, and you compare everybody around you to your place in society, you know what? You are without understanding. You have no idea what you're talking about. Phew! I'm sure that the people, as they read this letter in a public assembly to the Corinthians, I'm sure that group that's sitting there, probably in the congregation, did not like what the Apostle Paul was saying. But it's still the truth. Don't compare yourself to someone else. Don't consider yourself to be not in the top class. In fact, just get rid of the class system completely in your life. And you know what? You know what you're going to come to? You're going to come to a place of understanding. You're going to come to a place of understanding how wonderful God has created you as an individual. Now let's move on to verse number 13. But we will not boast beyond our measure, but within the measure of the sphere which God appointed to us as a measure. Now, what's Paul talking about here? A measure is a specified amount. It's like a teaspoon or a tablespoon. The word measure actually means a spoon. But it means a spoon that they would use to measure out specific amounts of spices, specific amounts of grain or whatever they were using in a recipe. And so he says, but we will not boast beyond our measure. In other words, we're not going to boast about something that we are not. We're not going to talk about it. We're not going to raise up something that we are not. We are not going to take a place. Actually, the word boast means to take a place or to set in a place. We are not going to set ourselves in a place that's beyond the measure. Now, notice what he says about this measure. But within the measure of the sphere which God apportioned to us as a measure. You know what? God has apportioned to all of us a measure. He's given all of us an amount or a quality or a quantity of what we are supposed to do. And you know what? We get into serious trouble when we go beyond that. You know, Billy Graham was a wonderful, wonderful man, led millions of people to Jesus. But you know what? I cannot afford to compare myself to Billy Graham and say, you know what? I need to be like Billy Graham. No, I need to be like Leon DeHaan. You need to be like yourself, and you need to say, this is the measure that God has made me. Stay in that measure. Don't go and try to be someone that you're not. That's what Paul is saying. We are not going to try to be someone we're not. And then to end verse number 13, to reach even as far as you. God gave me this measure. That's what Paul is saying. And this measure was to reach you. And I'm not going to go beyond that. I am not going to compare myself to someone else. I am not going to compare myself to those people that are sitting in the church and they're so muscular and they're so handsome and they're so intelligent and they're part of the high class system. I am not going to compare myself to them. I am going to fill the measure that God has, and that measure is to reach you, the Corinthians. What is God's measure for you? And in that measure, you're going to find people that he is destined for you to reach. Thank you for watching today. Join us again tomorrow.